Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and today I'm interviewing my friend, Kasey Jo. I am so excited for this because actually before we were talking a little bit before this, and you said you haven't talked about this on a podcast. And honestly, when I was thinking about topics, obviously a lot of people know you for growth mindset and behavior change, which we will weave those concepts into this topic. But I really wanted to get into the idea of like the journey of changing how you view yourself and really what that idea of like belief system is, and like all like, because honestly, that really is the root of everything. And you said you haven't really talked about this before on a podcast. So I'm stoked for this. And I know that everybody listening is going to get so much out of this. But before we start, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Man, I'm like, introduce myself. Where do we want to start? How far back do we want to go?
When I was 3.
Right. So here's where I grew up. This is how I was parented. No. So I kind of like to describe myself in general as being half psychology and half health and fitness in general. So like it's how my brain works, it's where my passions are, it's how my business has been built at this point. I do have a PhD in psychology. I studied health behavior change specifically. So even more specifically, I really got into the nitty gritty of growth versus fixed mindset and how that plays a role in how healthy we eat and how often we exercise. And then I took a lot of that and was applying it literally during my PhD as a nutrition coach and kind of seeing how some of the stuff in the lab actually played out in the wild. So I did a lot of that kind of intertwined at the same time. And while going through my PhD, the typical trajectory is to go to be a professor, do research, or go the industry route, work for like Fitbit or Apple Health or something like that, which would have been really cool, honestly. But I was kind of battling between this, like, well, I have this kind of little nutrition coaching side hustle. I could lean into that and see where that goes and see how I can like bring more behavior change and mindset science into that world. Or yeah, I could go the conventional route. So I took a chance and decided to go the unconventional route and build my business and see where that went. I knew I didn't always just want to nutrition coach. I wanted to do more. I wanted to build programs, and now I have the health mindset coaching certification, which is a certification for health and fitness coaching professionals to learn more of the strategies behind mindset and behavior change and the science of all of that. So I dove in, haven't looked back. It's been 3-ish years at this point, a little over 3 years. And it's been an awesome ride. I'm really excited to continue to like bring more of this and continue to combine the worlds of health, fitness, psychology, mindset, nutrition, all of it. And I'm excited to talk about something that I don't typically talk about today.
Yeah. And I think that this is, and if you guys listen to the show or follow me, like, that this is really where my interests have started to merge, because it honestly is the root of everything, and I think that it's so interesting how the industry, right, and we'll put that in air quotes, always seems to like oscillate with different things, right? And I think that there's been such a big push for mental health as like an umbrella term, right? Like mental health matters. Like, let's put mental health first. But what ends up happening, at least in my eyes, is that we have this focus on all of that, and then we don't follow it up with the other like physical behavior. You know what I mean? Like there's always be a disconnect. It's either like we're focusing exclusively on like physique or performance or longevity or like mental health, right? And it's like being able to merge all those things, which I think you do a really great job of. That is really, I think, where the future lies in terms of how we're actually going to be able to help people in the long term, because your body is influenced by your mind and vice versa, like obviously, as you know. And like this really is like, it's not just one or the other. And I think that, as always, like I said, the industry always seems to oscillate. It's like, IFYM doesn't work. Well, we need to do clean eating. Okay, well, that doesn't work. Well, we need to do this. Well, then, tracking macros, that can lead to disordered eating. So we just need to intuitively, it's like, like, why are we like, so there's always these like really big fluxes. And I feel like there's a really big flux towards mental health, which I'm super here for. I'm super all about, but we also, I feel like, have to, we can have those two worlds combined. Would you say that there's a difference Have you noticed a difference as a practitioner and researcher, like in the
Mhm.
past several years?
Yeah, you know what I noticed too, and like I think this kind of echoes what you're talking about is this idea that yes, okay, so tracking macros, paying close attention to your steps, things like this, like there's that camp that says that is obsessive and that is not healthy and you shouldn't be doing those things. And that camp is very much the anti-diet crew and also the like essentially don't need to be doing those things in order to be healthy. And like if you want to prioritize your mental health, don't do those things, you know? So that becomes, yeah, it's a very difficult, and obviously the conversation is so nuanced. And just because someone is tracking macros does not mean it's obsessive or it's impacting their mental health. In fact, it could be very well helping their mental health, right?
Yes.
So I think, yeah, it becomes people dig their heels into the ground into these certain beliefs. And I will say, I think a lot of this just comes from, without going too much on a tangent here, comes from this idea that we hear all the time as content creators, you need to be polarizing and you need to niche down and you need to have, you know,
So
this like this message. You're like, yeah, I'm ready to go on this one. So I do think like a lot of that is where that comes from too. And like, to be honest, the stuff that's most popular is the stuff that's most sensationalized. And the same thing happens on just like mainstream news, right? So a lot of this is like, okay, well, I'm going to get the most likes and comments and shares and like argumentative things going on in my comment section if I say like diets don't work and I'm part of the anti-diet crew. And if you love yourself, you shouldn't want to diet. And it's like, dude, there's so much more to this conversation.
multiple
So
things
yeah,
can coexist at once.
exactly.
And when you said the niche thing, like I understand, like, yes, you need to have a target audience, but like, holy shit, like, can we not as like a society understand that like an individual or a company can be multifaceted? Like that
Mm-hmm.
consistently blows my mind. Like I'm never like, oh, you only need to do one thing. Like I'm like, oh, this person does this, and that. Like that's so rad to me. Like I love that, you know.
Right.
But it's like
Mm-hmm.
in the world of social media and just media in general, which is how most people are consuming information and finding it, like whether we like it or not, it's the reality. Like
Mm-hmm.
people are like, nope, this is what I do, and it's like that's how they find it, and it's like,
Yeah.
isn't that boring? Like I can't stand most accounts because it's just boring. I know how I could improve my account. I know how I could, but I'm like, I don't do it. I like talking
Yeah.
about and this, and I like
Right.
and then when I think about my clientele who are like, they're all interested in a lot of different things. So I'm like, okay, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if I wanted, like, I guess, the carbon copy robots of everybody, like, sure, maybe
Right.
I only talk about one or two things, but it's like, no, like, I'm
Don't
interested
want
in,
that.
I actually want to facilitate people to have a multifaceted life. Like, part of this coaching is so that we can, you know, hey, we're going to take care of the nutrition, the training, the mindset stuff. So that actually is allowing you to be able to do these other cool things. Like that's part
Mm-hmm.
of what like my goal as a coach is. So it's like I'm encouraging people to be multifaceted in that way. So
Mm-hmm.
anyways, yeah, before we get too but this
Too in
this
the weeds.
honestly, this does go into a lot of what we're talking about. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for
let's
sure.
talk about like identity and belief systems kind of on the first like fundamental level. Like if somebody were to ask you about that, like how would you, I guess, even define that, put that in terms like self-identity? Because we hear these words all the time. Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
what does that even mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at a basic level, I think most people understand at face value, right? Your identity is something, it's a, not, I was going to say like made up, but sometimes, sometimes it can be made up, but it's essentially a set of beliefs based on experiences, feelings, situations, circumstances. Go full circle here to when I made a joke about how I was raised, but like that, like all of that stuff comes into play when deciding your identity, but also it can be more superficial things, right? Like you can take a personality test, or maybe you're so drawn to your zodiac sign that it's like, I'm a Sagittarius and like this is how I act and this is how I respond to things. And if you absorb that into your identity, now that's how people do. And we know this from research on self identity. People, once they have an understanding of what their identity is and what they're labeling themselves as, they will, speaking of digging your heels in the sand, they will do that, right? They will try to do everything to showcase that that is the case. even if like at its core they know it's not true, it's like, oh no, but maybe we can swing it this other direction and that still makes sense for like who I see myself as. So your identity and who you see yourself as is incredibly important, and probably more important than most people even realize. Like they don't understand how often they are actually operating from a place of their identity, and that's what's causing them to make certain decisions or go certain directions over their like true conscious thought process, right? It's coming from this automatic place of like, oh, this is who I am, so I'm going to turn right, when maybe left is actually the direction you wanted to go. So it really does make a big difference. And there's tons and tons of research on this, especially when it comes to like exercise, healthy eating, things like that. People who see themselves as an exerciser, see themselves as a healthy eater, are the people who are choosing to exercise more frequently or have greater intentions to exercise or eat healthy, et cetera, et cetera. Like we see it over and over again, which I think, you know, most people listening are probably like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But what are you doing with that information? Like, are you actually like, do you know what the identity is that you're operating from? Like, how much time are you actually spending with that?
Yeah, and that's where, and we won't go down this rabbit hole, but that's why identity politics is the fucking absolute worst. Because like you said, like, and that literally clearly defines it. Like, okay, here's the set of values, and I'm going to stick my heels in no matter what.
Yep.
And you are no longer able to make decisions for yourself, because you're only going to like, what is the group think? And that's where it can be really dangerous. And this is not just political. I'm talking about like left or right. I'm talking about like anything, you know what I mean? Like
Anything.
having an identity of like, I'm a this. And now I would say that potentially there could be certain upsides to this, right? Obviously, like when it's a positive thing, right? But as like, there's always this kind of continuum of like, if it's negative, it can really harm you, right? Like if you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm always someone who's late. Well, if you always say that and you identify as a person who is late, what are your behaviors going to exhibit? You're going to give yourself a pass that you're always late. Or I'm somebody who puts snooze on my alarm. Okay. Well, what can you do about that? But on the flip side, if you're like, no, I'm a healthy eater or I'm an exerciser, even if you're not, right? Like that can actually start to help. So I guess let's start with the negative part first. Of course, like, let's say you have this negative talk or this negative belief system in terms of like how you view yourself or your behaviors. What would be some ways that, you know, people could start to shift that away? Like, oh, you know, anytime that I'm a late night snacker, which, you know, not saying that nobody can eat it late, but we know what that means, right? Typically when you're talking about late night snacking, that means you've already had all your food for the day, probably having some uncontrolled eating. Or, you know, I'm not somebody who can stick to a plan. Like when you have that negative identity, what are some steps that we could potentially take to start overriding that?
Yeah. And what comes up for me first and foremost, and see, like, I can't not talk about mindset. Like every single one of those statements is a fixed mindset statement, right? Literally declaring yourself as a type of person, or like those words, I always do this, I never do that. Those should be like, that's mindset, like alarms are blaring, you know, fixed mindset alarms. So like understanding too that like hearing those things, like this is where from a mindset perspective, if you're saying these things to yourself, if you're hearing someone else say them, if you're a coach and your clients are saying some of these things, that should be an alarm for you to go, okay, we got some fixed mindset stuff going on here, right? So if you're thinking, oh well, I'm not someone who likes to exercise, I've never been someone who likes to exercise, that should be like, whoa, like why are we saying this, where is this coming from? So something you can actually do to unpack some of those negative self-beliefs, fixed mindset, whatever we want to call them in these situations, especially if they're like repeated patterns, which typically these things are, right? Otherwise we don't say them if they aren't something that comes up frequently. Is to actually, something I can lean on cognitive behavioral therapy here. So working through kind of like this step-by-step process, the first step being, what evidence do you have for that thought, right? So I'm not someone who enjoys exercise. Okay, so you're thinking this. There's a reason you're thinking this. Why are you thinking this? Like, where is the evidence to support this? So for you, maybe it's historically, I haven't enjoyed exercise. Every time I go, I don't like it. I just think about leaving. It's so hard for me to get there. I've never found something that I enjoy. Like, okay, all of that's valid, right? And that's helpful information to understand why you're thinking that way. The next step is to think about evidence against that thought. So you're not the type of person to enjoy exercise. Do you have any evidence ever in your life where that's like not true? And you have some evidence essentially not supporting that thought. So this person may be thinking, oh, like when I'm hiking, I enjoy hiking. And I guess hiking is technically exercise. So like there's an example of where this wouldn't be true. Or there's been situations when I'm working out with a friend that time seems to go a lot faster. I'm actually having a good time because there's a social aspect to it. It's like, okay, so like kind of continuing to like run through this list of where this is not true. Now, taking the evidence for and the evidence against, essentially what we're really trying to do here is create a more accurate depiction of reality, really. Now, weighing those two things, like what is the more accurate definition of that thought, right? So instead of I'm never been that type of person to exercise, I'm not that kind of person. Maybe it's I haven't consistently found exercise that I enjoy. That's the truth, right? Based on what actually has happened in your past and what is currently happening and how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis, that's the truth. Not that you're not that type of person. It's just that you haven't quite found your thing yet, even though some things have maybe kind of like given you a glimmer of hope. So now that we have that, how does that make you feel differently? And a lot of times when I do work through this with clients and we're doing this kind of in real time, at the end, they're like, I feel a lot more in control of this now. I feel like I better understand where to go forward and what this means. And so now when that thought comes up, the idea is because you've gone through this process, you better understand it. You can notice it and be like, oh, there's that thought again. It's kind of trying to get at me again, but I know it's not true. So like, what can I do instead? How can I think about this differently? So that is very much from just like a negative thought pattern breaking perspective. But when we're talking about fixed mindset, we're talking about these negative self-beliefs. That's essentially what they are, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when it comes to your identity, because your identity is something that has been cultivated over you thinking certain thoughts, same thoughts for a period of time. So yeah, I think that is one like very like strategic exercise that you can use.
Yeah, no, that's so great because I find that so many people they identify with that identity so closely, meaning like, oh, I'm so disgusted by where I'm at right now. I can't believe I let myself get here. And it's like, okay, hold up. Like that is so disempowering. Like maybe you're going to be able to pull yourself out of this rut for a few weeks, a few months, but you're probably going to find yourself back in this situation if you're always viewing yourself in that way. Instead of being like, I might be unhappy or even disgusted, to use this person's word, disgusted with my current physique. I'm not disgusting. I don't want to be here again. What are the steps that I can do to change this? And I know that's so small, but it really is so different. Like, oh, I'm lazy. Like, okay, these were the times where maybe your behaviors were lazy. These were the times that you weren't. Now let's become a not lazy, like you don't have to be a lazy person anymore. You know what I mean? Like you can choose, like these are all things that we don't have to internalize. And this has been like a process that I've been going through just because I can have kind of very default negative setting just for a lot of things. And it's really, really hard to work through, but like having, those cues to be like, whoa, here we go again. And you get better every time. I think, it's like any behavior, like you're going to get better at catching it early. And I don't know if you can speak to this from a maybe more scientific perspective, but like I always try to tell clients, like, listen, if you have that thought, it's okay. Like I'm not expecting the thought to go away. It's acting on that thought that's more important. Like if we want to get away from acting on those thoughts and those behaviors, like if you have it, that doesn't mean that you're a failure. Like I think that some people, especially in this, again, the online kind of culture is, oh, well, if you ever have a negative thought about food, like you have a bad relationship with food. Bitch, I have bad thoughts all the time. That doesn't mean that I have a bad relationship with food. I just had a thought. And maybe I had this thought because I didn't sleep well or I was stressed. Like there's usually a lot of reasons why those thoughts come up, but there's a difference of having that thought and then saying, well, this thought isn't me. This thought isn't what I'm interested in pursuing. and then stopping it and then moving forward. There's a very big difference. And I think that a lot of people are sold this lie, whether it's like that or like, I don't want like, you know, never be anxious anymore.
Oh, geez.
Well, if you guys could find that cure, you know what I mean? Like I would love to see
Yeah, bottle that up, please.
but like never having anxious thoughts is not the goal. The goal is to not act on those. So I don't know if there's a term for that or anything, but I find that is like, if we're able to stop what's going to happen after, that's more important than like, we're not going to ever cease negative thoughts. It's about acting on them.
Yes. Oh, I love all of this so much. And I don't know if you realize this, but you're basically speaking to acceptance commitment therapy. It's literally like a practice inside of psychology. Has been around for a long time. It's a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy, but a big part of it is accepting that you have these thoughts and these emotions, but that doesn't mean it has to define you, right? It doesn't mean you have to act on it. There's a big part of that is this idea, they call it diffusion or fusion. So someone who is in fusion, that like they're fused with their thoughts, basically, it's taking over and determining their actions and how they operate in the world based on those thoughts, those emotions, those feelings. And diffusion is what we're trying to achieve and try to allow those thoughts to happen, but not allow them to control the actions that we take and how we live our lives, right? A more, I guess, like less like jargony type of term would be like hooked and unhooked. So the idea is not to get rid of the thoughts, but instead just unhook ourselves from it, right? So the issue is not the negative thought. The issue is that you get hooked by the negative thought, and now it's essentially determining how you live your life. Like that's the issue. So what's interesting you bring up too is that like, oh, I had a negative thought about food or about my body today. So like, oh my God, that's so bad. And you spiral into this whole, like, I have a negative relationship with my body, with food, like all these things, what's wrong with me? And the reality is if it's not negatively impacting the rest of your day, and you just had that thought and it kind of just left, that's awesome. You know, that's great. That's part of being human. We also, as humans, have a negativity bias. Like we literally seek out the negative because it's a survival mechanism. You know, we're looking for the bad things to protect ourselves and be on the lookout for those things, which is why, you know, things like mindfulness and meditation and being present and practicing gratitude, like those are all super effortful things because our standard is not to do those things. It's to go, well, what's going to happen? What's going to be bad? Lauren, we actually talked about this when we were in Nashville and I was across the table and I was like, you know, sometimes I'm like walking the dogs and I see cars coming at me and I'm like, that could like, they could just end my life right now. Like, that could happen. And you're like, that's anxiety, Kasey. And like, but that is just like, our brains will do those things, right? Just kind of naturally. So we have to actively be like, no, like I'm grateful for the sunshine and this dog walk and like pay attention to that instead of like, what if that ongoing traffic just like makes a slight left turn, you know?
Oh my God.
So yeah,
absolutely. I put that in a story yesterday or the other day, and I was talking to one of my coaches, Danielle, and she's like, bro, you're so like dark. And I was like, what do you mean? And like so I've been doing 75 hard, and I was talking about, because if anybody doesn't know, there's two at least 45-minute workouts. So for me, and one of them has to be outdoors. So I've been doing a daily walk, which I do walks anyway, but normally I do 2 shorter walks. So now it's 45 minutes of a walk or some kind of cardio. Like that's going to be obviously, you know, more time with my thoughts, which is nice. But also sometimes I was like, sometimes that reflection can like, basically like I'm about it, like I'm on the path of on a path down that like nihilistic spiral, and like I'm like one step over the cliff, and like I'm just sharing this and I'm saying, but being present is the way that I avoid this. And all she was like, bro, like that shit was so negative. I was like, I was trying to give tools as how to not get there. And I'm like, maybe everybody else doesn't see it this way, but that's how, again, maybe that's just me. I don't know, but like it can just spiral really, really quick. But the best way that I've been able to combat that is to just be, okay, no, I am being present here and like refocusing, grounding, and that kind of mindfulness practice. And it is so hard. Like it is not easy. For, you know, obviously some people it's easier because they've done it for a long time, but you have to actively seek out and pursue that. And
Right.
that's something that I don't think is innate in most people. I don't think that most people, I would say that now kind of tides are turning, like it's become more of like a thing to do. But
Yeah.
I don't remember really, I don't know, outside of, the weird spiritual leader, like, 10 years ago, I don't really remember people talking about this as much as they do
It's
now.
true. Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Of
Hmm.
course, that can be taken out of context as well. There's plenty of that too. But yeah, I definitely think that those are great tips in order to get out of that. And just really, guys, like it's okay to have these negative thoughts and beliefs. But it doesn't mean you have to identify with them. And that should really be the core thing
Hmm.
to start working through. Now, so shifting more towards how do we create these positive beliefs and create this positive identity? What would be some tools, I guess, to do that?
Yeah, I think like we were kind of talking about and kind of segueing into this, a lot of it does come down to breaking through those negative patterns, right? And the more you break through the negative patterns, the more you'll be able to see the positive. And like what Lauren was mentioning, which also ties back into acceptance commitment therapy a lot, is that idea of just like being present. And actually, it's an analogy that they use in ACT acceptance commitment therapy is dropping anchor. So in those situations where you feel like kind of these negative thoughts are spiraling and now you're thinking about other things and now it's going this direction, you're like, oh my God, like all of this is happening, I'm not feeling good about this, like dropping anchor and bringing yourself back to the present of like literally, and this, it sounds like a little bit woo woo, but like move your arms and your legs and walk around and like touch yourself and feel like where you are, bring yourself back to like reality for a second. Because the truth is, like, those thoughts that you're having are likely not even fully true, right? The problem is, like, we have some of these negative thoughts and they just spiral into like birthing gremlin thoughts and turn into like this whole situation that's like, it's not even reality, which is why that like 4-step process that I went through before can be really helpful. But understanding that your thoughts can just be thoughts, and thoughts and feelings are not the reality, right? It's literally in your head. So like bringing yourself back to home base here and actually in the present moment can be very helpful. But then I think, I don't know, there's a lot of different directions we could take this, but I think just like like something, developing self-efficacy is a really important thing in the behavior change process, in developing new habits, things like that. And self-efficacy is essentially this idea that even in difficult times, you're still going to continue to work towards things that you value, things that you prioritize, your goals that can be health and fitness or otherwise. So, and how do we do this, right? How do we develop more self-efficacy? And a lot of that can be related back to your identity. So, how much of this could be just like affirmations, like I am a healthy person, I do healthy things, right? Sure, that could be part of it, and there's research on affirmations that's definitely part of it. But how much of it too is just literally taking action as if you already were that person, right? So if I were that ideal self, what decision would I be making? Would I hire a coach? Would I, not sit down and hit the next Netflix episode and actually go out and get a workout in? What would that person do? Because a lot of it's just like the more actions you're taking, the more you're showing yourself that you are that person, right? I also think just like using the language that you use, obviously, with yourself and with other people, even as little as, and there's research on this too, using different words, like instead of I can't have something, I can't do something, and instead I don't do that. I don't want to do that, right? So if you're in a social setting and you're trying to drink less because you're trying to show up as your healthiest self and like kind of go into that identity instead, and your friends are pushing, a third drink on you, and you're like, my boundary was 2 for myself, like coming into this, saying something like, oh, I can't because I'm working with a coach, or I'm on a diet, or I can't do that right now, kind of belittles you and also takes your power away and makes it feel like, oh, well, I can't, Instead, if you literally just said, oh, I don't have more than 2 drinks on a weeknight, or I don't want to do this because I set this boundary for myself, how much better that feels and how much more empowering that is just by switching literally one word. And the more you do that, though, the more you're showing yourself and like providing evidence for the fact that you are that healthy person. You are that person who like wants to feel good the next morning and like wants to wake up feeling their best and not feeling guilty about decisions. And you stay true to the boundaries that you set for yourself and all of those things. So even just little things like that could be really helpful. And also on sort of like the same line, communicating with other people in your life too, right? Like this could, in that very same situation, it could have been a text message that was sent to your group of friends beforehand, like, hey guys, I actually would love your support. I'm going to try to stick to 2 drinks tonight. So don't let me have a third one. Like if anyone else wants to like get in on this with me, like let me know. Honestly, when I do this with clients, they're always surprised because most of the time there are friends who are like, oh my God, I'm trying to drink less too. Let's do it together, you know, and they don't even realize that because they're not having those conversations. But that kind of allows you to like get in before you're in the situation too. That can be helpful. I mean, I could keep going with different strategies here, but there's a lot of different ways you can start to like develop that identity. But I think a big one is action.
Absolutely. I think that, and again, this is where the like disconnect of like the current movement, at least in some capacity, I feel like is there is so much talk of just talk and thoughts and affirmations, and all those things are so important. But what are the physical actions that you're taking? And again, this is kind of that combining of like mind and body together, like physically doing something. Like what are the actions? Like, are you proving to yourself, like, okay, you say that you're lazy and you don't want to wake up on time. Well, is it because you are hitting snooze? Is it because you wake up and you're scrolling on your phone? Like I got so bad with that, you know what I mean? And I know that it's something like I don't ever feel good when I do it. Like literally not once, not 0 times have I ever felt good when I do that. And for whatever reason, I got into that habit, right? And it's like, bro, like, what are you doing? Like, this is not like you, this is not how you want to be. So now I literally, and I don't know why, like, it's so stupid, but I put the charger, because I have a charger on, like my nightstand has like a plug in it. So like, it was one of those that just, well, I have the charger there. So now I took a new charger and I put it on the chair on the other side of the room. So when the alarm goes off, that's pretty annoying if I don't get it. So I physically get up, and the chances of me getting up and then laying back in bed are much smaller than, I mean, like significantly smaller than if I were just to roll over and either turn it off or do, you know what I mean? Like whatever, right? So it's something as small as that, like just telling yourself, like, I'm going to do this because I have all the reasons to want to get up. Like, of course I do. Like I have all the stuff that I got to do. But I was finding that if I didn't have like an appointment or had to be somewhere, I would just, oh, I'm working in bed. You know, I'm on my email, I'm checking messages.
Right.
You know, like but then, then I'll just scroll a little bit, or then I'll just, and now my eyes are like, it was just never good. So it's about, like you said, not just, okay, what you first have to, I think, say to yourself, okay, who do I want to be? Like, what are the systems that are anchoring me? But then now what are the actions that I have to take? And maybe that is hiring a coach. Maybe that is studying for something. Maybe that is having just accountability with your friend group. And I think that, you were talking about how people build things up to be so much more. The social aspect of change, I think people build up to be so much more than it actually is. Like, I mean, 8 out of 10 times. Now, does everybody have that one person in their family who's going to make some fucking off the wall comment? Do you have that, nosy coworker? Yeah, maybe. Like you might have that, but the chances are, and I always try to tell clients this, like, listen, those people are most likely not going at home being like, man, what did Kasey eat at dinner? That was really what did they, nobody cares that much. You know what I mean? Like, and if they do, then they have a lot of other issues that they need to deal with on their own terms. As long as you're not like, you don't need to walk into somewhere and be like, oh, I'm eating like this. Everybody here is eating like shit. You guys should really like that person. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to be condemning other people for their choices. But I think a lot of times we build up so much in our heads. Oh, everybody's going to judge me here. Well, my friends always order this, so I have to order. Are your friends paying for your dinner? Did your friends, is it a set menu? No, even if it is a set menu, you can still regulate how much you're eating. Right. So there's always still that level of choice. And I think that if we go into it with that saying, okay, I'm a person who identifies with these behaviors, these are the goals that I'm working towards. And that person is going to have, that example, 2 drinks. that person is not going to have dessert. That person is going to choose the higher protein option, whatever that is, like going into it and, maybe cluing people in for sure. That can really help. And then, yeah, I think just talking about it and saying, this is what I'm doing, or I'm not, I'm not doing that right now. Like I'm just, I'm taking a break, or I'm not gonna, and that's something that like, again, like I, with 75 hard, one of the things is not drinking. And obviously everybody who knows me knows that I'm a, social drinker. So I'm going to an event and I know that people are going to be asking, because it's just like, hey, let's take shots. Let's do that. That's just, people know that that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'm, going to have to explain that a million times. They're just gonna be like, I'm just not doing that right now. And I'm not going to make a big deal at, I'm on day 20. No, nobody cares.
No.
Like, literally, nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Like, literally, nobody cares. I'm just not doing this right now. Hey, it's my goal. I set this for myself. And it's just kind of, you got to make it work. And it's just one of those things that I think we can either over-identify with things, right? And then it becomes like, everybody's like, okay, hey, bro, like, it's all good. It's all good.
Right.
So we can either overdo it, like I said, you walk in, well, you shouldn't be eating that. Like, you have any idea how bad that is for you? They don't care right now. They don't want to hear that. If they wanted to hear that, guess how a change is going to happen. If you consistently show up and you bring your food, eventually someone's going to go, hey, what are you eating? Like, you look really good, or your presence is like really vibrant lately. Like, I've noticed you've been doing this. Then maybe they're actually going to be interested in it. If you come barging in, like, what's that shitty meal you're eating?
It's not going to do anything anyway. Yeah.
Who's going to make any changes that way? So I think that you having that, like, that positive version of yourself, like whatever ideals that you want to live with, and then having that accountability, right? Like, I mean, I think we both can attest to, like, we've been coaches for a long time. Like, the power of coaching is not necessarily the program. It is the accountability. It's 100%. The accountability, and it's the fact that we are detached observers in our clients' lives who are connected enough to know what's going on, but also detached enough to be able to see past whatever emotional things are going on and whatever is potentially hampering why they're not making change. And that really is the value of coaching. Of course, part of it is going to be like, hey, here are these adjustments, but it's going to be like, here's the adjustments because of all these things that maybe you couldn't see. And I think that is, the power of having accountability, because otherwise we, those negative thoughts are going to come in, those stressors are going to happen, and it's okay. But everybody needs accountability. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't care how perfect, how great you are in one area, you're probably going to need it in another.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to mention too, is that, like, I think, Lauren, you're a really good coach, and you operate from a place of, like, behavior change is important and lifestyle factors are important, and there's plenty of coaches who will say, oh, the adjustments, that's what I do. That's what you're paying me for. Like, here are your macro changes each week. When in reality, like, we know there's a lot more to that. And, like, the accountability that comes with, like, having a good coach, not someone who's just, like, making tweaks on a week to week basis, right? Like, there is a difference there. And so I just wanted to point that out, because I think too, like, you're talking about all of this, I'm like, yeah, but Lauren, that's because you're a really good coach. Not all coaches are operating from that place either. So, like, it's important.
Fair. That is, I guess, fair. So thank you for that. I know you do that, of course, as well. So when we are talking about just identity in general, like, if somebody is, like, listening to this and they're kind of like, oh my gosh, okay, like, this is so resonating, like, where would be the first step, I guess, that someone would take? Would you say, let's tackle the negative? Would you say, let's tackle the positive? Would we say, let's create, like, sit down and just brainstorm, like, who is it that I want to be? Who is it that I don't want to be? Like, would you say that there's kind of a first step in order, or would you say, no, do all of this and just really give yourself, like, I'm going to sit down and create this space in order to, like, get all of this out? Like, where do you think people should start? So we obviously covered a lot, and there are a lot of, like, I really hope people go back and listen to these things and, like, go back through the steps and all of that. But it can feel kind of overwhelming. So where would be, and we both know that change is not going to, like, yes, you can make changes with something that's drastic, but we also have to make sure that we have the large goal, but we also have kind of the smaller things. So first, where should someone just, like, start with all this? Would you recommend?
Yeah, honestly, this is something I say for a lot of any behavior change, any change you want to make in your life is awareness. Like awareness needs to come first, because you can't change what you don't know needs changing. You can't improve what you don't know needs to be improved. So you really, if you're listening to this and it does resonate and you're thinking like, okay, I don't think my identity is in the right place. In fact, I still identify as the party girl or the person who like really doesn't like exercise and historically like tried to bow out of like runs with my friends and things like that. Like that's where my head is still at. Like, no wonder I'm having so much trouble. Right. So that in and of itself, like if someone's listening and you're going through that process right now, that is step one. Really, truly like understanding like where this is holding you back and like where your identity currently lies and how that contrasts where you want to be. The biggest thing I see in coaching is that is holding people back is something called cognitive dissonance, which Lauren, you're probably very familiar with. The idea that I want to be this person, I want to do this thing, but my actions are not in alignment with those values and those priorities. And that doesn't feel good. Does not feel good to be like, I hired a coach, I'm trying to be healthier, I'm trying to drink less, but I also am finding myself still being pulled to be that party girl and to say yes to the next drinks and to like go out when I know I don't really necessarily want to, but I'm just like feeling pulled to do that. That feels horrible to be in that sort of like back and forth of like, but this still isn't what I want, you know? And that is cognitive dissonance at its core. So that kind of feeling is something you want to start to pay attention to, like recognize the cognitive dissonance, recognize some of those negative thoughts and beliefs that you're having. Honestly, don't change anything. Just pay attention. That's where you really need to start. So like if you're hearing like I'm talking about all these different strategies and steps and things that you could potentially do, like don't worry about any of that. This podcast you can always come back to. Start by just paying attention. Like take the next 48 hours to just pay attention to any sort of like identifying words, phrases, things that you're saying to yourself, to other people. Are you saying, I always do this, I never do that, I'm not that type of person, I am that type of person? Pick up on the language, write it down in your phone, just notice, just pay attention and see what you come up with. Because if you are really kind of in this space of like, I don't even know where to begin, this is something I know I want to work on, but like, what the heck? Just pay attention, because I promise that in and of itself, if you take some dedicated time, will reveal a lot. So that's truly step one.
Yeah, and I think that's where the power of journaling is because you are simply reflecting on what is happening. And, you know, I think a lot of times when people think about journaling, they think, you know, they have to have some like elaborate practice, but a journal could just be also you jotting down thoughts at different points in the day, right? Like, or it could be like almost like a dear diary, like, why am I like this? But like literally, it doesn't need to be like a 6-step gratitude practice. It doesn't need to be like a, you know, you're filling out this no, literally just sit down. And when people struggle with journaling, they often, okay, this sounds cool, I want to start it, but I can't really do it. I always try to say, set some kind of a limit. I'm going to write for 1 page. I don't care how long it takes me. I'm going to do this. Or if you have limited time, I'm going to write for 10 minutes. That could be 6 pages. That could be 2 sentences. I don't really care what it is, but I have a goal for doing this. And if you can continuously show up and do that, you're going to be able to reflect on a lot of different things. And that can also be a kind of just a practice, like you said, just jotting things down. I'm a big like hand writer. Like I like writing things. Like I physically find that I am able to get things out better. But if you want to just jot things down in a note, and sometimes I do that, especially for like content, you know what I mean, or just like ideas for like
you quickly think of something. Yeah.
I'm like, bro, what was I talking about? But sometimes it can be a little haphazard. Just being able to jot those things down. And that's, I mean, think about it. Like whenever a client, like say you're having issues, this is like the first line of defense I have when someone is having issues with like sleep or digestion or something like that, right? Okay, like, well, there's obviously a lot of reasons as to why. Like I could give you 10 reasons, but maybe your real reason is the 11th thing that I didn't share. So I need you to reflect on what this was and give me some key identifying things that happened that day, that happened before, that didn't happen. And then we were able to piece together, okay, why is it that your sleep is disrupted, right? Could be a number of things, but like, here are some strategies. But first, let's really reflect on this and then come back to me. Because again, I can throw things at people, but why do that if it's not even going to be useful? So I think that's a really great place to start. Awareness. It's so interesting. Like this in my life, the more that I'm aware, ironically, the more I pick up on patterns, and it's so interesting that like you start to see different patterns of things, and awareness has been coming up a lot, and it really is so fundamental to anything, because without awareness, first, you're not even going to be able to make these changes, but then you're not going to be able to catch them when you are going kind of down that spiral. And that's why it is so important, like whether it is sending it to a coach, whether it is sending it to a friend, family member, significant other, whoever it might be, or even again, reflective of yourself, hey, whenever I'm feeling this, I really need to go do this, okay, I need to book a meditation class, or I need to go do okay, it's time for this. And maybe it's time for a therapy thing. Maybe, you know what? I've been trying this thing with my diet for 6 months, and I'm just running my head into the wall. Like, I need to hire someone out. I wear too many hats. I hear this all the time. I wear all these hats. I just want to give this to somebody else. You know what I mean? And so I think that we all need that, and everybody needs that in different areas. So the only way that you can find that out is awareness. And the last question I have, I guess it's tied in, and I'm like, I wanted to make a awesome segue, but of course, you guys listen, you know that I don't do that. So when we are talking about making change, right? I'm just interested in your thoughts. This doesn't have to be a concrete thing, but say somebody does want to make a change. There are some people who obviously say like, you need to set something that is so different than what you've been doing, right? Something that is so dramatic. Let's just say, we'll call it dramatic, right? Something that's very different than what you've been doing to kind of like shock your system, for lack of a better word. And really like, because you're not going to get out of whatever bullshit you've been doing by doing the same thing. Other people are saying, no, just take one small step at a time, and be really gentle with yourself. And it's okay if you. So I have an idea of what I think you're going to say, but I'm interested in hearing from you. Because again, I feel like there's two camps, as always. There's never around, there's always two camps. So the take one tiny step and be gentle, or no, drastic change. You better hold yourself accountable no matter what.
Oh, this is a good question. I think like my gut reaction is like, well, it depends on the person, right? But like, of course, like it depends. But the truth is like, I actually made a Instagram post recently that was essentially reflecting on like New Year's resolutions type of stuff. And it's, if you want to do something different in 2023, you can't keep doing the same thing that you were doing in 2022, right? So something needs to change if what you're currently doing is leading you in a direction that you don't want, for sure. But the like intensity of that change, which is essentially what you're asking, does like depend on the person, depends on the situation. However, I think what we're really trying to get at here is, how do we make you leave like comfort zone area, right? And I think that's kind of at the crux of a lot of change in general, is that we keep doing what we're always doing, not because, what did they say? Like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same result, which is definitely not the definition of insanity. But
there's more layers to this, but
exactly. But that said, like it's not insane to think that way. That's what's comfortable, right? It's kind of like our default is to keep doing what we've always done because it's comfortable. So I think the question is less about like, do we take a small step or do we take a big step, and more about like, how do we get outside our usual comfortable zone? And for some people, taking a small step is uncomfortable, and like that's enough, and that severity is the same as someone else who's like, I need a drastic change, in order to switch this up. And for that, like that could feel the same for two different people, even though one person is like, I'm going to start adding an apple to my diet, and someone else is, I'm getting rid of every single thing that's in my pantry, I'm starting over, I'm hiring a coach, I'm joining a gym, I'm doing this like drastic lifestyle change, I'm cutting off ties with these people in my life who are toxic, and like doing all of this stuff. Like that could feel the same for those people, right? Because this is where the independent, like depends on the person situation comes into play, because each of those people had different past circumstances, situations, self-beliefs, identities, things like that that are going to play a role. So I think maybe just asking yourself the question of, what would be a step that would make me uncomfortable and would start pushing me towards the person that I want to be? What does that look like to you? And ultimately, like, that's the direction you should go.
Absolutely. And I love that answer because it really, as with everything, it really does depend. But I think that more than just it depends, I think that it is important to reflect on the individual. And, you know, there's a lot of people who like to knock different methods, right? And I think that we really have to look at, okay, well, what does that person need, right? Like when we see some people who do extreme things, there are some people who are just going to be more extreme individuals and they operate really well that way. So like, who am I to say to not do that, right? That might be better for them. Also, there might be somebody who really, really needs something that is more scaled back and small because like you said, that has the same magnitude to them, even though it's a lot of steps behind. But if it's still getting them moving forward, who am I to judge, right? So I think that it really depends. And that's, again, where a good coaching relationship comes in. And you start to learn where you can push people because you kind of start one way and then somebody, you know, you can kind of see how they respond. So that's always kind of like a learning process. But I really think that this, again, comes back to awareness and understanding of yourself and saying, okay, and you can always start somewhere and then adjust, you know, like it's not
nothing's permanent. Yeah.
No, nothing is permanent. You might decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do this week. And then I might be like, whoa, like that was way overwhelming, not to the point of like, this was challenging, but like, I mean, I did these things, but everything else fell apart.
Okay, and now I feel bad about it, right? Because I didn't do all the things I set out to do. And then now you're back at square one because you're not motivated. Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's not good, but it's also not good to be like, all right, I'm making this change. And then it was easy. Like, okay, it should be hard. And again, whatever that feels like to you, is what it's going to feel like. So I think that approaching things with that mindset, but honestly, you know, once you do decide and have a handle on that, I would say that it probably is best to just see certain things through, you know, at least so you can hold yourself to be, because if otherwise you're always going to say, oh, well, I'm a failure because I continue to fail. So it's like, all right, let's really reflect before we start something and then figure out, okay, now this is what I'm going towards. Yes, we can still make adjustments, but like, I'm going to stick this goal through. With
I do think there's there's a delicate balance. And I actually think there's research on this too, related to like goal setting in general. And we want to essentially be seeking moderately challenging goals. So
I can't remember who wrote that paper, but I know exactly.
It's a paper. It's out there. Yeah. But like, what is moderately challenging? You know, every person's moderately challenging is totally different. So we want to be in this like happy zone of feeling pushed and stretched, like we're working towards something. Because if someone's like, oh, I'm going to add an apple a day to my diet, and that's like a small step, but that's way too easy for someone, they're not really going to feel like they're gaining any traction or, you know, making progress quick enough. So they'll lose momentum and fall off. And then the same thing can happen on the other side where it's like, yeah, I'm doing a lifestyle 180 and now this is overwhelming and I can't keep up with it and I'm a failure, and then you don't do it, right? So it's like finding that happy middle ground for you, whatever that looks like. And that's, absolutely where a good coach can really help you out.
Yeah. So really hope this gave you guys some good insights, and I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. So thank you so much for coming on. Share where people can find you and learn more either about your services and also the coaching course.
Yeah. So as far as social media goes, I'm mainly on Instagram and I'm Coach Kasey Jo over there. I'm going to attempt living in TikTok land this year, so don't hold me to that, but I'm Coach Kasey Jo over there as well if you want to join that fun. But if you are interested in anything, I offer products, programs, like Lauren mentioned, the health mindset coaching certification. You can find out more info at kjocoaching.com. I say that now as we're like in the middle of like massive website redesigns, and like that may change, but for the most part, it'll get you somewhere, and then you'll find your way. You'll find your way.
Yes, you'll find a way. It'll get redirected. No,
exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate this, and I know everybody's going to get so much out of this. So for more information about any of our coaching services, you can visit teamlocafit.com. Oh, and before I forget.
Oh shit! Yeah.
About to log off the damn podcast. Announce which we haven't announced at the time of recording, but this will be announced when this comes out, our event that we're going to be doing.
Yes. Oh my God. Like totally, totally forgot.
About to
What
log
is
off.
it? March 17th, 18th, 17th through 18th.
Yes.
We'll be in Tampa, hanging out, talking all things fat loss from a scientific perspective, no bullshit perspective, but also just hanging out and having a really good time. And that's really the biggest component of all of this is connection, getting to hang out, make some new friends, networking, get out of your comfort zone, as we chatted about, lean into that identity.
Yes. And honestly, like it's really hard because I feel like a lot of events are either just hanging out or they're just, talks and information. So we really wanted to create something that was going to be combining all of those things. And so it's going to be me, you, and Chanel. So we all have kind of a similar like vibe, and we were like, why don't we all do something together? Like this just makes the most sense. And I was like, we got to make it fun. So of course, like I wanted to set up all the fun stuff. So we will put that information below so you guys can check it out. But it's going to be amazing. We would love to see you there. And just saying, it's your girl's birthday weekend, so
All right.
it would be a great time. And also, if you live anywhere, probably almost any place outside of California, you're going to want to get out of there probably around that time. It'll be a great time of year to visit Florida as well. So you get like a little vacay in as well as learning, hanging out, connection, all the great things. So we will put that information all in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it. We would greatly appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next week.